All right, we're at section 1.4. I'm going to talk about some very important concepts that have to deal with deduction for right now, and then later on in section 1.4 we'll talk about some concepts for inductive arguments. And these concepts are validity, the issue of truth as it relates to premises, an argument, whether it's sound or unsound, strength and cogency. These are going to be relevant to inductive, okay? And validity, truth, and soundness, that is deductive. Okay, so let's start with deductive arguments. What do we mean by a deductive argument being valid? I'm going to give you three definitions here, and this will help pull it together, but I want you to realize validity, this word validity, it is about the structure, of the argument, the logical thread that is present. Okay, it's about the skeleton. I'm going to use this metaphor a lot. How the bones are lined up. Okay, bones lined up. Okay, validity is not about content or are the premises true. Anytime you are trying to decide if an argument, a deductive argument, is valid, you are to assume the premises are true, okay? You're just looking at the logic. Pretend like you're a Martian looking at an argument, and all you know, because you're a Martian, is you do know logic. You do know good logical structure, a connective logical thread, a connective logical inference, and you know nothing about Earth. But you can look at these terms not knowing if they're talking about real things or not, but you can see how they're lined up and you can determine validity, okay? So the validity is just about the skeleton, the structure. It's not about whether the premises are true or not. That comes a little bit later if you're trying to decide if an argument is sound. Validity is just about the skeleton. How the bones are lined up. Are they lined up correctly? It's valid. If they're lined up incorrectly, the argument is invalid. So with that, let me give you these three definitions here. A valid deductive argument is an argument in which it is impossible for the conclusion to be false given that the premises are true. Given means you're just to assume the premises are true because you're just looking at the skeleton, okay? And the point is, if you have your terms lined up in the right way, meaning it's valid, and your premises are true, and you can just assume they're true, given that they're true, if everything's lined up, you're going to have a conclusion that has to be that conclusion. It can't be something other than what the conclusion is, or it can't be false, right? When you say something's false, what's written down is false, that means it can be something else, or it is something else, right? So a valid deductive argument is an argument in which it is impossible for the conclusion to be false, given that the premises are true. If you have correct structure, and you assume the premises are true, it can only deliver you that conclusion. That conclusion can't be false or something else. Here's another way of putting it. A deductive argument is said to be valid when it is impossible for the conclusion to be other than it is, because it is strictly inferred from the premises given. And again, given means just assume they're true, just like the Martian would. And here's another one. The conclusion follows with strict necessity from the given premises, given again, just assume they're true, due to a correct logical thread. The form is correct, the skeleton is properly arranged, the bones are lined up properly. And I'm going to give you some examples here, okay? But the key is validity. If you want to, from now on until you get this down, right next to valid, valid structure, valid skeleton, okay? Validity has to do with how things are lined up, the skeleton, not whether you need to decide then that the premises are true. Just assume the premises are true and go, okay, given what I'm given, does that conclusion follow? Okay, let me give you some examples. Okay, and it'll help here. If it is raining outside, then the streets are wet. It is raining outside, therefore the streets are wet. So we'll make this simplified. If it is raining outside, we'll call that R. Then the streets are wet, we'll call that statement W. It is raining outside, that's another R. Therefore the streets are wet, W. That would be if R, then W. That's called a horseshoe. That's a symbol for the if-then statement. It is raining outside. R, therefore W. This is valid. Okay? Now, if you're a Martian, you don't know about rain, you don't know about wet, any of that. You're just looking at this and going, well, this says if it rains, streets are wet. Then it says it is raining. Therefore, streets are wet. A Martian goes, I don't know about Earth, but I do know about logic, and that follows. And it can't be otherwise. You remember up here it says a deductive argument is an argument where it's impossible for the conclusion to be false or other than it is given that the premises are true. Here, the premises really are true, but a Martian would go, I'm going to assume they're true. And a Martian's going to say this is valid because we can't say, therefore the streets are not wet. You can't get that they're not wet from that. This is the only thing you can get from these premises. So it is valid. Let's go to the next example. If it's raining outside, we'll call that R, then the streets are wet. The streets are wet, we'll call that W, therefore it's raining outside. Oh, and you see here where I said modus ponens, since this is valid, they have a name for valid forms. And if we were going to use it with just variables, usually they say if P then Q, P therefore Q. That is called modus ponens. In the affirming mode, you're affirming the antecedent here. Don't worry too much about that, but I kind of skipped over that. Modus ponens, it's a valid skeleton. Here, let's put this over here. If R, then W, this time W, therefore R. So, this is saying if it's raining outside, then the streets are wet. So let's say you're in the bedroom and you have a little girl and you're sitting on the bed, the curtains are drawn, and she's looking, and she says to you, she goes, Daddy or Mommy or Uncle or Friend, yeah, the streets are wet. Okay, thank you. Do you know just by her saying the streets are wet that it's raining? No, maybe a fire hydrant busted. Maybe they shot a movie the night, an hours before, and they got the streets all wet. You know, all scenes at night, for example, they wet the streets in a lot of movies for aesthetic effects. Maybe a sprinkler system broke. So that's why a Martian would look at this and go, if it's raining outside, then the streets are wet. The streets are wet, they'll go, that's not enough to know for sure that it's raining outside. It could be that it's not raining outside and the streets are wet for some other reason. So this could be false, right? Could be false. Or, I like this phrase a lot, other than it is, right? If your daughter told you by looking out the curtain that the streets are wet, you don't know for sure that it's raining. Okay? There are other ways streets could be wet. So this form here, invalid. Just by looking at what you're given, assuming they're true, you're a Martian, you won't conclude for sure it's raining outside. Now, let me be careful. It could be raining outside, but it could not be raining outside. You just don't know for sure, and if you don't know for sure, it doesn't follow, not follow with necessity. Okay? It's not 100% certain. A deductive argument with the right skeleton, that conclusion has to be 100% that, with necessity, has to follow. Alright, so this one here is invalid. Let's go to this one here. If it's raining outside, we'll call that R. And let's do this to clean this up here. We'll get this out of the way. Okay. All right, that's R. If it's raining outside, then the streets are wet. If the streets are wet, then the streets are shiny. Therefore, if it's raining outside, then the streets are shiny. And if we were going to put this in simple terms, here's how the bones line up, the terms. If R, then W. If W, then S. Therefore, if R, then S. Now this is valid, and this form is called hypothetical syllogism. We'll talk about those terms, that phrase, later. That is valid, and a Martian could look at this. If it's raining outside, the streets are wet. If the streets are wet, then the streets are shiny. So if it is raining outside, we can jump all the way and know that the streets are shiny. It's valid. Given the truth of these premises, that conclusion has to follow. You couldn't have these premises and go, therefore, if it's raining outside, then the streets are not shiny. So this follows with necessity. It has to be this. It can't be something else. If it is something else, it does not work. It contradicts these premises, okay? So this here is valid. Now, what if we had this example down here, and I had to correct a mistake here. So here's what it is. If it's raining outside, then the streets are wet. If the streets are asphalt, we'll do an A, then the streets are shiny. I meant shiny there, not that other word, hot. Therefore, if it's raining outside, then the streets are shiny. This would be if R, then W. If A, then S. Therefore, if R, then S, and that does not follow. Okay, so if it's raining outside, then the streets are wet. If the streets are asphalt, then the streets are shiny. Therefore, if it's raining outside, the streets are shiny. That could be true, but remember, based on these premises, they haven't connected shiny to rain. So just because you know it's raining outside and the streets are wet and the streets are asphalt and they're shiny, you don't know that if it's raining, the streets are shiny. It could be shiny or they could not be shiny. Okay? So this is invalid. And the point is, if you have the right structure, that conclusion has to be. But based on this, a Martian's going to go, there's a disconnect. There's really no way to connect rain and shiny streets based on how these terms are connected. See, they're connected here, but there's a disconnect. But here, let me go to a different ink. There is a connection. See, la-di-da, it's all connected. Here, there's a break in the chain. Okay? So there's some examples of what we mean by validity, okay? If you have the bones lined up the right way and just assume that the premises are true, it has to deliver the conclusion written down there. If you can find yourself saying, you know what though, the conclusion could be different, then it's not a valid deductive argument. And that our second example was a great example. Sure, on this one here, everybody, right there, it could be raining outside, but you don't know 100%. It could not be raining outside. It could just have had broken sprinklers. Okay, let's go to the next page here. All right, now I want to talk about soundness. Well, actually, I'll talk about soundness in a minute. Let me give you one more example that will help. You remember when I said it doesn't really matter about the premises being true or not? You just assume that they are. Validity is just about the skeleton. So whatever they throw at you, you just assume the premises are true. Here's a great example. This argument is valid, even though we know the premises are not true, and in this case, they are wacko. Okay? If oranges are blue, then hippos can fly. Oranges are blue, therefore hippos can fly. So oranges are blue, that'll be, well, let's do that with a B. Okay. If oranges are blue, then hippos can fly. Oranges are blue, therefore hippos can fly. So if we were going to put this out, if B, then F, B, therefore F. And guess what? That is modus ponens. So you see, that is valid structure. This is valid. Okay? Even though the premises are really wacko in real life, you're a Martian, let's say you've never looked at oranges, you don't know if hippos can fly or not, and all that. So you're going, well, if I just assume oranges are blue, then hippos can fly is true, and then they're saying oranges are blue, therefore hippos can fly, you'll go, this is valid, and you couldn't say hippos can't fly. So the skeleton is correct, but here was an example where you see why you don't need to really focus on the truth of the content. You're looking at how things are connected. So this wacko bunch of sentences, it's a valid argument. Let me write that down again. This is valid, but if you have right structure, valid structure, but you don't have true premises, there's one thing we can say about this is this is not a sound argument. So let's go to the next term for deductive argument, soundness. An argument is either sound or unsound. And soundness, unsoundness, validity, invalidity, these are terms that deal with deductive arguments. They are not terms that we're going to use for inductive. Okay? A sound argument is, it's got to be deductive. Just said that. It has valid structure. So remember, anytime you use the word valid, why don't you write structure right after it so you know it's just about how the skeleton or bones are lined up. But if you have a sound argument, you have to have the right structure, valid structure. It has to be a valid argument, and the premises have to be true. Both conditions are required, okay? An unsound argument has either invalid form, so you have a bad skeleton, or one or more of the premises are false, or they both are false. So any of the premises used, if you have one or more than one, all premises involved have to be true to life. And you have to have the right structure, then it is sound. So based on that, this one here is not a sound argument, even though the bones are lined up. So it's got valid structure, so it's meeting this criteria right here. The premises are not true, they're wacko. Okay? And sometimes you could have true premises, like back here we had true premises. Look at this, the second example. If it's raining outside, then the streets are wet. That's true. The streets are wet, let's say that was true. It's still, even though you had true premises, it was not a good structure, so this would not be sound there. Okay? So for an argument to be sound, you have to have valid structure and true premises. Here, you have valid structure, but you do not have true premises, so this is unsound. Okay? And here's an example here. If Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, then Abraham Lincoln is dead. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, therefore Abraham Lincoln is dead. Well, this is, if he's assassinated, then he's dead. He was assassinated, then he's dead. So it's if A, then D, A, therefore D. That's valid structure, and these premises are true. If Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he is dead. He was assassinated, true. That's true about being assassinated, and he's dead. So this would be a sound argument. Okay, so there's validity and soundness, and next we'll move on to what I'm going to do is give you a test you can use to determine if a deductive argument is valid, which we've kind of already done anyway, but it sounds so simple you may not see the significance of it. So our next video is going to be how you test for validity. It's only a test for validity for deductive arguments. So that's next.